Well, I welcome you all, some of you back to us, and some of you for the first time to St. John the Baptist Orthodox Church here in Canonsburg. This is our memorial lecture series. It's in honor of Metropolitan Theodosius, who was the Metropolitan of the OCA for almost 30 years. He was a son of this parish, came back here in retirement after his repose. The tail end of COVID, things were getting back to normal. We thought it would be a good idea to try to continue his mission as he tried to do so as our Metropolitan, and find ways to help address the various things that we struggle with as those trying to be Christians in this North American context. And so we've been doing this for almost 5 years. We've had, I think, nearly 100 speakers or something like that. We were doing it once a month for a while. We're about once every couple of months now. It's hard to find new speakers. We've kind of exhausted the available speakers in the greater Western PA area. But for the third time now, we've been blessed to have Dr. David Ford be a speaker here. He's a friend of mine, a former professor from my seminary days. He's still the professor of church history at St. Tikhon's Seminary, my alma mater, as well as his wife is here, Dr. Mary Ford, who was professor there. I think you've been retired, Dr. Mary, for 2 years now. It's hard to believe, you know, all my old professors are. I think you're the last one, Dr. David.
Yeah.
It's still.
Okay, well, there you go. Fine. Yeah, you're not the only one, but the end of an era. But Dr. David tonight will be speaking on created male and female. He has a lot of work done in this area. There's a number of books that he has brought. If you'd like to pick one up, I think he said the smaller books are all $10 and the larger books are all
Suggested donation.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it actually is a generous donation to he said any proceeds actually go to our parish. But I will say they're going to go to this lecture series. Our hope is anytime we take a donation at these lecture series, so as you leave, if you would like to make a donation, please do so. It goes to have us have a kind of a fund built up so that we can maybe bring speakers from farther afield. Again, this was so nice because Dr. David and Dr. Mary came to us on their way from Kentucky, from Louisville. But without further ado, I welcome Dr. David to come up to the podium and give his third in this hopefully continued series of lectures from you at our parish.
All right, great.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.
So great to be back again with all of you. Yes, we are always celebrating Christian marriage. Great timing. Thanks for emphasizing Saints Peter and Feronia. They are the patron saints of marriage, as he was saying, for the Russians. And recalling, if I may recall this with you and Janine, we were right there, right? When you proposed? We were almost.
Yes.
We were in the same building.
Yes. You were among the first to learn.
To hear the news.
Yes. Once we came out into the public.
Yes.
From the seclusion. You know, I didn't ask her in public, but yes.
Right. Granted that. And we were rooting for you and Janine for some months before.
More than months.
More than months. So, what a joy, for us to see our graduates, visit them in their parishes, see them in action. I mean, it's so worthwhile for us, so meaningful, such a blessing. So, thanks for having us again. I have pretty much of a prepared talk. This general theme, sexual differentiation, male and female, it's the issue of our time, isn't it? Even the very basic differences in between male and female are under attack. So many forces in our society want to minimize those differences. So I think very much in our time, it's important to emphasize the glorious differences, right? At the same time, of course, affirming all that we share as men and women. So, a summary of my talk is this, beginning briefly, explaining why the church fathers in general did not speak very much about sexual differentiation, partly because it was most important for them, especially the earlier Eastern fathers, to convince Christian men and the surrounding society as a whole of the absolute equality, sameness of the common human nature shared by men and women. That was not an obvious thing in those ancient days. And the concomitant equal dignity, value, and capacity for spiritual growth that women share with men. Then we will turn to the writings of St. John Chrysostom, who we see as somewhat of an exception. Among the fathers, he did emphasize the differing roles that the Lord has ordained for men and women in light of their very obvious anatomical and emotional differences. St. John especially insists on the God-given pattern of male headship in the family and in the church. This headship, leadership, he describes as self-sacrificial servanthood in the family and in the church, modeled on Christ's own self-sacrificial love and service for his holy bride, the church. We will also observe St. John's high appreciation for the goodness of sexual desire, of female beauty, of the saintly women of the Old and New Testament times, and even of his own time, yes, and of the holy estate of marriage, especially as it's meant to symbolize Christ's love for and service to his bride, his church. Then we will conclude with suggesting that St. John's wisdom along these lines is especially needed in our own time and place, when certain powerful elements in our current society are adamantly trying to minimize the natural God-given differences between men and women, which is the heart of the major heresy of our time, which I think we can call unisexism. Trying to minimize the differences, blurring, right? And it leads to so much confusion, right, in our own time, especially among the youth, even trying to figure out what does it mean to be a man or a woman, a boy or a girl, even. Okay, some preliminary considerations. As with all the church fathers, including St. John Chrysostom, the primary emphasis in their writings regarding our sexual differentiation, our creation as human beings of either only two forms, only and ever two sexes, two genders, right? Men and women, male and female. Their emphasis is on the oneness, the sameness of the human nature that men and women share, not on their sexual differences. And we'll see some of the reasons for that. In fact, I think we can say it's an overwhelming emphasis, which the fathers, especially the earlier Eastern fathers, felt was necessary because women were so much undervalued in those ancient times. Sometimes even just considered like chattel. So Christianity brings such a new light on the dignity and glory of womanhood. So the men, they need to be convinced of the full value of their wives, their mothers, their daughters, granddaughters, as being fully valuable, fully important, as they are. Yeah, as fully capable of every aspect and extent of spiritual growth, including all the avenues for that: fasting, vigils, ascesis, theosis, martyrdom. The church fathers also very crucially and very rightfully felt compelled to insist on the oneness, the sameness of human nature, of men and women being equally valuable, in order to convince the surrounding pagan society of the full equality of value and humanness of women with men. Yes, as we've been saying, women treated almost as cattle, as possessions by their fathers and husbands, who had almost dictatorial power over them. Let's just recall the virtually unlimited power of the patriarch of the extended family, that Latin term, pater familias, like a dictator of the whole extended family, right? For instance, he could have any baby born into his extended family put to death on his own order. This all should remind our Orthodox sisters in Christ that the status, the general quality of life of women in the ancient world was exponentially improved through the influence of Christianity, as the Christians emphasized the absolute equality of men and women, sharing the same human nature. And as the Christians taught and lived the wonderful consequences of this bedrock understanding of the equal humanity of women and men. For two examples, it must have been astonishing for the men, often newly converted to Christ from paganism or from Judaism, who first heard St. Paul's words, the husband, this is 1 Corinthians 7:4, the second part of that verse, quote, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. That was just so revolutionary to a pater familias, right? Who's treating his wife almost like a slave. Wow. In one fell swoop, St. Paul demolishes with that sexual double standards, at least in marriage. And then secondly, church fathers like St. John Chrysostom and St. Gregory the Theologian sharply criticized the double standard in the laws of the empire, whereby a husband could commit adultery with little or no legal consequences, and with a high degree of social acceptance of his having a mistress or having casual sex with those of a lower social rank. But if his wife slept with someone else, she could even face capital punishment. Glaring double standard that Chrysostom and other fathers worked against. Other reasons why the church fathers did not speak very much about sexual differentiation: most of the church fathers were monastics. We always have to remember that. They didn't even want to be thinking very much about the opposite sex, lest they become more vulnerable to sexual temptation, more apt to having sexually explicit dreams, for instance. And they had the same concern for all their fellow monastics to whom they were writing. So no wonder they were not talking very much about sexual differentiation. When they do talk about women, these monastic writers, their most important purpose, their main purpose, was usually to assure the female monastics that they have just as much potential and capacity for spiritual growth as the male monastics do. So again, in this context, they're emphasizing the sameness of the human nature which men and women share. Besides these reasons, surely we can assert that the church fathers did not speak much about the many natural differences between the two sexes because these differences are so utterly obvious. They didn't need to be delving into the differences. So obvious, not only anatomically, but also in temperament and disposition that come with our sexual differentiation. It was just common knowledge, right? And of course, our situation, though, is hugely different. Even up to relatively recent times, there wasn't much need to emphasize how men and women are so different. It was just so obvious. But in our own time, we see this heresy of unisexism growing in our midst. One of the most glorious repercussions of the profound awareness of the mutual dignity and value of man and woman was that the fathers, especially St. John Chrysostom, urged the husbands in their flocks to treat their wives with utmost respect and admiration, with tender and magnanimous self-sacrificial service, cherishing them and protecting them with the love of Christ. Chrysostom declared to the husbands in his flock, "You have seen the measure of obedience," from Ephesians 5:22, which is part of the wedding, the epistle reading for the Orthodox wedding service, Ephesians 5. Wives, be in subjection unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. So now, St. John says, also hear the measure of love, from verse 25 of that same passage. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her. So St. John says, talking to the husbands, do you want to have your wife be obedient to you as the church is obedient to Christ? Then take yourself the same provident care for her as Christ takes for the church. Yes, he goes on, even if it becomes necessary for you to give your life for her, yes, and to be cut into pieces 10,000 times, yes, and to endure and undergo any suffering whatsoever, do not refuse it. In the same way then, as Christ brought to himself her who turned her back on him. Here he's referring to the Lord's people, Israel, all those centuries before Christ comes to the world. How many times his people left their faith in him and went whoring after other gods, as it says often in the Old Testament. Yet he still wooed her. We see that especially in Hosea chapter 2. So beautiful. Goes after her. That one, those people who so often strayed from him, who hated and spurned and disdained him, St. John is saying. How did he win her back? Not by menaces, nor by violence, nor by terror, nor by anything else of this kind, but by his unwearied affection. So also, he says to the husbands, you must act towards your wife. How different from pre-Christian marriage, again, just to always remember the context. In the same way, we can add the clergy were to treat the laity, both women and men, with the same kind of self-sacrificial servanthood, in the same spirit as Christ demonstrated in taking a towel and a bowl of water and washing the feet of his disciples. This is the supreme paramount image of how male headship, and indeed how all hierarchical leadership, which is so often maligned in our society, it's meant to operate. Hierarchy is not a bad thing in itself, but it needs to be lived in a Christian way, right? With the one at the top of the hierarchical arrangement, required by the Lord to take sacrificially the ultimate responsibility for the material and especially the spiritual well-being of those whom the Lord has placed them over in the hierarchical relationship. We can call this pattern proper hierarchical leadership, the way it's meant to be lived out. Christ-centered, Christ-directed, Christ-inspired on the part of the husband and father in his family, with the home as the little church, right? And very, in such a parallel way, on the part of the clergy, caring for their flock, the church. which is the family of God. Yeah. In both realms, we can say that there is a kind of first among equals relationship, if this is helpful. We all share the same human nature. We're all equals, right? But there is a certain ordering. So, first among equals. The husband and father share the very same human nature, shares the same human nature with his wife and children. The clergy shares the same human nature with all the members of the flock. Also, it's important to quote St. John Chrysostom in reference to male headship in the family. He says to the husbands, "Your wife's subjection to you is but slight." And in reference to male headship in the church, St. John says to the clergy, concerning the laity, "You have partners in your power." See? So here is where we do see implicitly the huge importance of sexual differentiation being proclaimed in the writings of the church fathers, who deeply understood the natural God-given pattern of male headship in the family and in the church, with the husband and father always being a man, with the clergy always being male. This ordering reflects the fact, of course, that Adam was created first, then Eve from his side, indicating their sameness of nature, but not a sameness of position or function within the very natural hierarchy. 1 Corinthians 11:3, St. Paul says, "The head of every man is Christ, the head of every woman is man, the head of Christ is God." Here we see, now coming to the Holy Trinity, here we see the quintessential example of the first among equals pattern, with the Father understood as the fountainhead of deity, the first, right? And isn't he always listed first whenever we say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? We never juggle the terms, right? And how impossible is it for us to think that the Son is somehow diminished, right, by being second in the ordering, or that the Holy Spirit is somehow maligned by being third in that order. The ordering never implies that the Son and the Spirit are any less fully divine or any less fully important. They share the same nature, but they have different positions in the hierarchy. Yes. Hence, who among the laity, either man or woman, would want to aspire to having the much more difficult role that the clergy had, since the clergy bear the ultimate responsibility for the spiritual well-being and eternal salvation of every member of the flock? Who would not want to be thankful for the clergy, who willingly undertake the responsibility for the proper serving of all the liturgical celebrations, all the other pastoral duties? And we know saints who fled from ordination, right? Knowing what a tremendous responsibility it is. So, still we may ask, why is it that it's the men and not the women who have this natural headship in the family and in the church? The answer is so utterly obvious that the church fathers never thought even to mention it, let alone to justify it. Just look at how we are made. Men, generally speaking, taller, heavier, huskier, physically stronger, mentally and emotionally tougher, generally, more deeply voiced. Just ask the kid, who would you rather be disciplined by, your mama or your papa? He'll run to his mama, right, and flee from the papa. Of course, when it comes to human reproduction, this is where the sexual differentiation is most especially striking. And again, it's so obvious, too obvious for the fathers to even feel the need to comment upon it. And of course, it's the husband whom the wife most especially needs in times of pregnancy, maybe even if her menstrual periods are difficult, when she's in labor, when she's breastfeeding, paramount times when she needs the leadership of the protection of her husband. And in the church, that's kind of an aside. Can we ever even imagine how unseemly it would be for a female deacon trying to serve liturgically, being 7 or 8 months pregnant? It's also very understandable in light of the context of the very real oppression of women in the ancient pagan world and the corresponding need for the Christians to end that oppression through declaring and emphasizing the very same humanity that men and women share, that the church fathers did not write or preach very much about the very real maleness of Christ. Instead, they wanted to emphasize that women share identically in the very same human nature that the Word of God, the Logos, the second person of the Holy Trinity, took to himself in the Virgin's womb in his all-glorious and utterly ineffable and staggeringly astounding and astonishing incarnation. And hence, that women share identically in the possibility of salvation, sanctification, deification, and sainthood. And of course, in their time and place, as in every time and place in all of human history, the totally obvious, very major differences, both anatomical and psychological, emotional differences between men and women, were indeed so obvious no one needed to comment very much on them. And as we said, because the church fathers were monastics, mostly living only among men, women were simply not very much on their minds. So, in our own time and place, as we've said, it's so different. The totally obvious differences between men and women are no longer considered to be so obvious, strange as it is. Even though contemporary science has identified at least 6,500 genetic differences between men and women. So it's imperative in our time for our Holy Church to contemplate, to pray about, to study, to discuss, to meditate upon, to revel in these differences. Indeed, I think in our current very, very sexually confused time and place, it's absolutely necessary for us to plumb the depths of the endless, mysterious riches of the differences between men and women, to bring forth, with our Lord's help, a vision for living that celebrates and conforms to these bedrock differences, rather than trying to minimize or even to eradicate these differences, which then would obliterate the vitally important symbolic meaning of these sexual differences. So, as we understand the reasons why the Church Fathers rarely talked about these differences, let's look to St. John Chrysostom. What does he say along this line? We've already quoted him concerning male headship in the family and in the church. This understanding includes great appreciation for the fact that the Lord God, our Creator, made men and women with such significant differences, both in anatomy and in our typical psychological emotional makeup, precisely in order for men and women to have not the same roles as our dear modern feminists want to insist upon, because women and men do share equally the same human nature, but in order to enable us to have significantly different roles to carry out, both in the home and in the church family. No church father has ever, no contemporary holy elder even, or eldress, as far as we know, has ever said that equality and sameness of nature demands or even implies sameness of function or role. This is the quintessential error of feminism. It's an entirely modern fabrication that because we have the same nature, we should all be doing the same things. And often they want to press that to somehow convince everyone that we do share the same nature. But our church proclaims that in so many ways. It doesn't have to be proven by men and women doing the same things. This false idea comes partly through the influence of Marxism and so-called cultural Marxism, which began seeing hierarchy in any form as being automatically oppressive to those under those above. And since differences automatically create and demand hierarchy, necessitating a hierarchical arrangement of priorities, it was concluded that the best way to avoid the oppression that they believed would automatically result from the hierarchy of men over women, the best way to eliminate that oppression that they thought was inevitable would be to eliminate as much as possible the differences in roles for men and women, including the role of the men having headship over their wives in family and in the church. At the foundational wellspring event of modern feminism, that's the Women's Convention held in Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was later to edit the Women's Bible in the 1890s. That's an interesting story in itself. Also led by Lucretia Mott, a leading Quaker reformer. One of the four major demands in their proclamation, their call to action, was that wives should no longer be subject to their husbands. So what clues are there relating to the mystery of male and female in the vast corpus of St. John Chrysostom, in addition to his very clear and strong endorsement of male headship in the family and in the church, always remembering the understanding is self-sacrificial servanthood in this headship. The most prominent would be in his writings, his full endorsement of St. Paul's powerful insight that every marriage is meant to symbolize, to represent, to image forth the love-filled relationship that Christ, the bridegroom, has for his bride, the church. Symbolism which is proclaimed anew at every Orthodox marriage service, since St. Paul says in the epistle reading for that service, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loves his church and gave himself for her." What an awesome calling it is for us who are married to that our marriage would be an image of Christ's love for his church. I think we would also want to emphasize that Chrysostom, more than any other church father, rejoices in the awesome creation of woman. We're going to quote him on this. Also, in all the many ways a wife is a boon to her husband, helping him mightily on the path of salvation. Thirdly, in the tremendous spiritual exploits of the female monastics and martyrs. And fourth, in womankind's particular gifts of character and service, especially gentleness, solicitude for others. So, concerning creation of woman, here I'm going to quote from Volume 1 in my series, Sing to Your Soul. It's a 3-volume set that they're all back there for your consideration. Volume 1 is on the highlights of salvation history. So how does he describe the creation of Eve? How great is the power of God, the master craftsman. And the Greek word there is aristotechnou, kind of like aristocratic technician or something. to have made the likeness of those limbs from that most tiny part, and to have fashioned such senses, and to have prepared a living being so perfect and entire and completely appropriate, capable of discoursing with Adam and providing much encouragement to him through the sharing of her being. So from Adam's rib, God fashions this rational living being, and in the Lord's inventive wisdom, he makes her perfect and complete, like the man in every way, rational and capable of providing him assistance in his times of need and in the affairs of life. For it was God who was arranging everything in his wisdom and creative power. Bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, God took one piece from the whole of what he had molded and fashioned the woman so that she would have everything in common with the man. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. St. John says, do you see how he gives her this name, so that the name would show forth the commonality of nature of the two, and with the manner of her creation being the basis for constant love between them and a bond of harmony. Now I'm going to turn to this volume called Women and Men in the Early Church, The Vision of St. John Chrysostom. This is the revised version of my dissertation, actually, my doctoral dissertation. I really just tried to let Chrysostom speak for himself. The whole work is almost all stringing quotes together. Great quotes all by our beloved Chrysostom. Let's hear what he says here. The presidency of the household. Here the wife is in control. Here she is mistress. We can observe in this description of the wife's role the great dignity and the crucial importance of her calling, raising children, keeping the household, directing the servants, preparing food, spinning thread, making clothes, managing the household finances. Chrysostom says a husband will never be able to outdo his wife in any physical, material way in comparison to all that she contributes to the marriage. So here, let's quote him directly. I have shown that our wives provide us, talking to the husbands, no little benefits. By the way, the first chapter in this book compares Western fathers with early Eastern fathers, and there really is quite a difference. Just one little sign of that, Augustine says somewhere, he can think of no reason for the existence of women except to bear children. Chrysostom's so much different from that. I have shown that our wives provide us no little benefits, but if we are willing to make them a return in spiritual things, we could surpass them. For it is not possible in bodily things to offer an equivalent. Why is this, he says? Do you contribute much wealth? But it's your wife who preserves it, which is equally important, so you have much need of her. Why? There have been many men who have had great possessions, but have lost them because they did not have someone to look after them. As for raising the children, you both participate. The benefit from each is equal. Or rather, he says, she indeed in these things has the more laborious service, always bearing the offspring, being afflicted with the pains of childbirth. Hence, only in spiritual things will you maybe be able to surpass her. And we'll see what else he says along that line. Here I say, though less prone by nature to be aggressive and militant, women often outshine men in spiritual warfare and spiritual athletics. two of Chrysostom's favorite images for the spiritual life. So let's hear what he says along this line in homily 13 on Ephesians. Maidens not yet 20 years old, who have spent their whole time in inner chambers. Remember how in the Byzantine society there were women's quarters, right? That were off limits to the men, especially those of more wealthy means, who have spent their whole time in inner chambers in a delicate and soft way of life. These very ones, in a moment, seized with Christ's flame, have put off all that indolence and even their very nature. They have forgotten their delicateness and youth, and like so many noble wrestlers, have shed that soft clothing and rushed into the midst of the contest, the arena, to be thrown to wild beasts. So far does their zeal surpass their nature. What about spiritual warfare in general? Chrysostom says, for the war against the devil and his powers is common to the women as well as the men. In no respect does the delicacy of their nature become an impediment in such contests. It's not by bodily constitution, but by mental choice that these spiritual struggles are decided. Therefore, he says, in many cases, women have actually been bolder in the contest than men and have set up more brilliant trophies. He praises Old Testament women so highly. An example of this: let the men hear, let also the women listen to these things. We are told of these holy ones, so that we might emulate their race and kind, and also lest the women appear to be the weaker. For who among us has defense? Who receives pardon when such women demonstrate such eagerness and such Christian philosophy, while we men remain continually bound to the cares of the world? Quoting him further, and that you may learn that this is the measure of courage. Here he's talking about the widow who served Elijah the prophet. What could be more courageous than that woman who, both against the tyranny of nature and against the force of hunger and against the threat of death, remember she cooked him a meal with her last bit of flour, right? How she stood fast, nobly, and proved to be stronger than everyone. Shall I say something great and startling? This woman gave more in her hospitality than did our father Abraham. Concerning Sarah, Abraham's wife, he says, you are not better than Sarah, more noble or more wealthy, even if you are an empress. Concerning both Sarah and Abraham, let husbands and wives take note and imitate their harmony, the bond of their love, the depth of their devotion, and let them emulate Sarah's self-control. Concerning Rachel, Jacob's wife, great and ineffable is the philosophy, the wisdom of that woman. He holds up other Old Testament women as examples for both women and men: Esther, Rahab, Tamar, and the mother of the Maccabean martyrs. The godly women in his own time, he says this, commenting on the reference to Mary in Romans 16:6. How is this? A woman again is crowned and proclaimed victorious. Again we men are put to shame. Or rather, we are not put to shame only, but we have even an honor conferred upon us. It's an honor we have in that there are such women among us. We are put to shame in that we men are left so far behind them. We also find him highly praising the deaconess Olympia, to whom he wrote 17 letters from his time in exile. his close friend, his very significant partner in ministry in Constantinople. He highly praises her for her spiritual accomplishments. He refers to her great intelligence. He speaks of her as a treasury of piety, a summit of wisdom, a soul trampling on the fantasies of earthly things. On women's particular gifts, he doesn't say that much, and probably for those reasons I was mentioning. But he does say this. He refers to a godly wife as, quote, a skilled pilot who, quote, will transform for her husband the storm of his spirit into calm by means of her particular wisdom. In his homilies on St. John, Chrysostom makes a short but telling statement in trying to explain why Mary Magdalene stayed at the tomb of Christ after Peter went home. He says, full of feeling somehow is the female sex, and more inclined to compassion. Then he says, St. Mary Magdalene received no small reward for this great zeal of hers. For what the disciples did not see, this the woman saw first, angels sitting. His great esteem for women, especially his deep confidence in their capacity to excel, both in spiritual and material things, are summarized in a way in this quotation from his 10th homily on 2 Timothy. So let's listen to this. You see how inflamed for the faith the women were, how ardent. Such were Priscilla and this Claudia, mentioned in 2 Timothy 4:21. Already crucified, already prepared for the battle. But why, when there were so many faithful, does Paul mention only these? Manifestly because they in purpose had already withdrawn from worldly affairs and were especially illustrious, for a woman as such does not meet with any impediments. It's the work of divine grace that the female sex should be impeded only in the affairs of this life, or rather not even in them. For a woman undertakes no small share of the entire administration of society, as she is the keeper of the house. As he goes on to say, without her, not even political affairs could be properly conducted. For if their domestic concerns were in a state of confusion and disorder, those who are engaged in public affairs would be kept at home, and political business would be poorly managed. So neither in these matters, as in spiritual things, is the woman inferior, for she is able, if she is willing, to endure 1,000 deaths. Accordingly, many women have suffered martyrdom. She is able to show forth modesty and gravity and holiness, without which no one shall see the Lord, and contempt of wealth if she wishes, and in short, he says, all other virtues. How am I doing on our time?
It's 8 o'clock. It's 8 o'clock. You started 10 minutes late.
Can we go a little bit more?
Sure. We always do, so.
You're being so attentive. Thank you very much. Okay. Good. Okay, full disclosure. So often Chrysostom is criticized by those who have a particular agenda they want to point. They want to paint the church fathers in a bad light, feminist scholars. There are certain moments in all of his writing. He does talk about women's typical penchant for self-adornment, with perfumes and creams, with makeup and fancy hairstyles, expensive jewelry and clothing. But he castigates the man for these very same things. So he's not just picking on the women by any means. And we always need to remember, anytime he is criticizing anyone for certain penchants towards ungodly life, it's always for their own good, right? To help them get back on the track of keeping godliness first. He yes, here's an example. Excuse me. In homily 73 on St. Matthew, Chrysostom bemoans the fact that because of lewd gazing, there must be a partition in the church separating the men from the women. The women's side of in the nave and the men's side. Unlike in the apostolic church. So, quoting him, the women have urged themselves into the manner of courtesans. Yeah, of course, it's just sometimes. It's not a blanket statement. But then he immediately says, but the men are in no better state than frantic horses. So, you have to read the whole thing. You can't just pluck certain passages for your own agenda, you know. After an exhortation of his concerning a penchant for luxury and talkativeness, in a certain imaginary woman, he reminds the men of his congregation, quote, there are also men worse than this woman, but forasmuch as the authority is entrusted to men, we accordingly are speaking about a woman at the present moment, not as though vice abounded more in them. Think not, therefore, that we talk this way as undervaluing the female sex. It is not this. It was just how we happen to be speaking at the moment. And very significantly, St. John Chrysostom never says that women are sexual temptresses, unlike some of the Western fathers. In one powerful passage, he asserts that in the things in which women excel, they do not have those things in common with men. Their solemn dignity, their fervency, their devotion, their love for Christ. In these things, women excel even more than the men. Again, speaking generally at that point. Very interestingly, St. John is in no way prudish. He's not reticent or embarrassed to talk openly and frankly about sexual things on occasion. He indicates his appreciation for the creation of woman. We've seen him do that very strongly, right? And of female beauty. Let's read this. What is beauty of body? An extended eyebrow, a merry glance, a blushing cheek, ruddy lips, a straight neck, long wavy hair, tapering fingers, a fair blooming complexion. The beautiful woman is always beautiful. He once even said that the well-ordered, decorous table of holy men, referring to monks in their refectory, he compares the refectory table of monks, quote, he says, is like a fair and well-favored woman, needing nothing external, but having her beauty from nature. Indeed, he says a woman's beauty should remind us of the gracious and masterful artistry of her maker. Quote, beholding the Lord's creatures, his creation, you should admire the artificer. And again, in speaking to women, he says, quote, God made you beautiful, that he might be admired even in your beauty. Again, so different from someone like Tertullian, who calls women the devil's gateway and urges them to disguise their beauty. Very different. Also, he talks openly and favorably about sexual desire. Again, so different from some of the Western fathers. Just a little bit here. From the beginning, he says, God has been revealed as the fashioner by his providence of this union of man and woman. Speaking of the two as one. There is never such intimacy between a man and a man as there is between husband and wife, if they are united as they ought to be. Truly, truly, this love is stronger than any tyranny. Other desires may be strong. This one never fades. This love, eros, is deeply planted within our nature. Unnoticed by us, it attracts the bodies of men and women to each other. Because in the beginning, woman came forth from man, and now from man and woman, both men and women proceed. He says somewhere else, God also linked them together by their natural needs. And he is very clear, anything natural is good, because created by the good God. Even after the fall, because it's all God's provision, right? Still. Yes, he says, God also linked them, man and woman, together by their natural needs, linking them as if by an unbroken bond when he encircled them this way. You see how sin led to women's subjection, but how God, so ingenious and wise, used these things for our benefit. So I comment here, there is no hint here, as opposed to the Western fathers whom we studied in chapter 1 in this book, of sexual attraction being evil, or being inevitably tainted with lust or concupiscence, which is the common Western translation of the Greek word epithemia. Epithemia is a neutral word. It just means desire. It's important where we direct our desires, right? In the proper way. But for the West, it's so telling that one word translated concupiscence, doesn't that automatically have a negative connotation, usually taken in a sexual sense. Rather, sexual desire, an integral part of our human nature, which is still inherently good after the fall. Here's quoting him on Romans 1. Genuine pleasure, that which is according to nature, and this is in his commentary on the verses 26, 27, condemning homosexual activity. He says, see, genuine pleasure is that which is according to nature. Setting the pleasure according to nature, which they would have enjoyed with more sense of security and greater glad-heartedness, and so would have been far removed from shameful sins. One more passage, two more along this line quickly. The child is a bridge connecting mother to father, and the three become one flesh. But suppose there's no child. Do they then remain two and not one? The husband and the wife? No, he says, because their intercourse effects the joining of their bodies, and they are made one, just as when perfume is mixed with ointment. Seems such a positive image there. And he says also, if partaking of the same table produces unanimity, even in robbers, towards their foes, much more will be their becoming one flesh. For such is the being the partner of the bed, how effectual this is to draw us together. Again, like some, he doesn't say marital relations are only for children. He stresses the unitive importance of our relations as well. The cleaving to, thus showing the closeness of the union and the fervent love. Well, let me end with some reference to Plato concerning unisexism. This is very powerful. O you subverters of all decency, who mix up males as if they were females, and females as if they were males. What a word to our own society. Even leading them out to war. This is the work of the devil, to subvert and confound all things, to overleap the boundaries that have been appointed from the beginning, and to remove those boundaries which God has set to nature. God assigned to woman the care of the house, to the man the conduct of public affairs. Of course, speaking in general. On another occasion, when St. John is lambasting Plato and, quote, the Republic in which he enacted those laws full of gross turpitude, Chrysostom exclaims, "What do you say when Plato equips the women with arms and helmets and leggings and says that the human race is in no way different from dogs? Since he says with dogs, the female and the male do just the same thing in common, so that the women do just the same things as the men, and let everything be overturned. For the devil has always been eager, through these philosophers, to show that our race is in no way more honorable than the beasts." What a word to our own time. The naked ape, all those efforts, right, to reduce humanity to the level of animals. He says Plato's really doing it. Well, so, to conclude, by the prayers and love of St. John Chrysostom, by his very presence in our midst, let us do all we can to proclaim the glorious truth of God-given sexual differentiation in our own time and place. Let us men cherish our manhood and live up to our calling to cherish, protect, and provide for our wives and children, and do all we can to encourage the females in our life to cherish their womanhood. And let all our women accept their womanhood joyfully and gratefully. May they cultivate and relish their femininity and do all they can to encourage the males in their life to rejoice in their manhood. May we all indeed cry out with gusto, with awestruck wonder and amazement at the profound wisdom of our Creator in crafting humanity in two marvelously complementary forms, male and female, even as Adam surely could have cried out upon waking up from his deep sleep and first seeing Eve, even as our Lord himself perhaps could have cried out upon beholding Adam and Eve, the first two members of the human race, the crown and summit of all of creation, right? Yes, may we all cry out with great appreciation, vive la différence. So, do we have time for comments, discussion?
Of course, if people need to leave,
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's right. No one to feel.
it's always good to have an opportunity for people to ask questions. So, any questions, Dr. David?
What do you think? Yes.
Yes, Dr. Porter, two questions. What do you think Chrysostom's critique of the church, not the secular society, but like how we're doing in the church? And what's your opinion? Like, what put up there? How would you assimilate some of these teachings into what you see as successful parishes in terms of grades and successful parishes?
In terms of differences of male and female, I mean, are you just
what would his critique be of the Bible and church in terms? Are they addressing its progeny? Like, your comments might be seen as controversial in some areas, right? In some areas, they don't even touch on the topic. Do we need to be more forceful or be more vocal in terms of this?
Well, I think just to talk about the male clergy, I mean, it's a great proclamation in itself, right, of the God-given purpose in creating us in two sexes. So I don't know if that's part of your question. I mean, yeah, I think we really need to resist any blurring of the symbolism of the male priesthood as symbolizing Christ and his maleness.
Question.
Anything else? Yes.
With the ordination of deaconesses, so it's maybe happening to St. John Chrysostom's time.
Yes.
Happened again recently.
Well,
So what do you think about it?
you're referring to the one in Sutherland, Africa?
Yeah.
Very questionable, very problematic. I mean, yeah.
It's not the
The
same
first
thing
group
at
were
all.
not the same. And the last one was so preposterous. It's not a restoration. I mean, that second, the most recent one, was so obviously not a restoration of the deaconesses that were in Chrysostom's time. They were never in the West, only some portions of the East, and only for some centuries, only for ministering to women's needs, and they never served liturgically. So that last one in Zimbabwe, even the vesting was using male deacons' vestments, and with the intent of that woman doing everything a male deacon does. So it's egregious for them to call it a restoration. It's really something brand new. It's the typical feminist thing, right? To prove that we have the same human nature, the women have to do the same things men do. But we already know it's the case. It doesn't have to be proven.
They mentioned that.
Yeah.
They mentioned the booklet.
Yes, Mary and I have done some writing on this, and Ancient Faith is going to be publishing a booklet that we've submitted to them on why we have only males as clergy.
What's it called?
So that's why only male clergy. It's in the midst. It's hopefully it'll come out pretty soon. In their topical issue series. Yeah. So there's so many reasons. Practical, symbolic, theological. Yeah. Yes, sir. Yeah.
You mentioned briefly about the separation of men and women in
Oh,
the church.
in the church, sitting in the church.
I was wondering
Yeah.
if you could elaborate, and should we go back to something like that? And what was actually the purpose, the benefits, and maybe why it's not like that anymore, or if it's modernity that's led to that, but if you could elaborate.
Yeah, he lamented. He said it shouldn't be this way. If we're all concentrating on the Lord, we shouldn't be looking around, see how someone else is dressed, or with any kind of allurement. But he said, as a weakness, as a condescension to your weakness, I guess we have to have it. He didn't say let's take it down, but he lamented it.
barrier.
It was a wooden barrier.
Oh, actually separated.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, okay. So where's
He said because of lewd gazing.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah, he said it shouldn't be that way. Let's just concentrate on the Lord and, not be looking, not having wayward glances. But if we can't be that way, then I guess we need the barrier to help us.
But the women were living in private.
But it does reflect
They
that.
weren't just around with men like we are, like right now.
Right.
This wouldn't be happening. They didn't interact at all. So then to come to the church and have that was so unusual. That's why they had the separation.
Because it was like the first time they were together in one room, and so there was like, yeah, like,
Basically,
wow, look at that, there's women over there.
Yeah.
God. Okay.
Right. There's a wonderful canon in from the Council of Trullo, 692, where the women are begged, please don't set a snare for your brothers. Don't twist your hair in cunningly devised circlets and braids and all of that. So, I mean, it's an ongoing temptation for, of course, especially for men, probably. Anything else? Yes, David.
don't know if I'm going to express it properly. So, I think you made the point that in the West, the attitude towards women was different than in the East.
Really, much,
So,
very different.
do you think that attitude in the West gave rise to feminism
Yeah,
and the current?
I think so. That's an overreaction.
So
That's an
and so maybe
overreaction.
feminism doesn't exist in the East so much as it does in the West, and it's the reaction to what was being taught in the West.
Yeah. I didn't mention it in my talk, but the Decretal of Gratian, very important collection of canon law in the West, hugely important, dating from about the year 1140. It flat out says women are not made in the image and likeness of God. Then you have, less than 100 years later, Thomas Aquinas, the giant of the second 1,000 years in Western theology. He says that that every woman is a misbegotten babe. I mean, these kinds of
Which is accepted from Aristotle.
and yeah,
It's a
well, yeah,
It's important is that
Yeah.
the West, when they get
Going back to Aristotle.
well, they get access to Aristotle, they get
Yeah.
just take it whole cloth.
Yeah.
Without we'd already Christianized the teachings of Aristotle, essentially taking the good things from it and rejecting the bad stuff.
centuries early.
Centuries
Sure,
earlier,
sure.
the West had lost all
Yeah.
these things, and they recover these ancient philosophers and they accept it all wholesale, and that includes Aristotle's teaching on women as
Yeah,
essentially Aristotle teaches that you wouldn't have genetic terminology, but genetically everyone's a male, but the female fetuses are the ones that somehow fail to properly develop it.
yeah, yeah.
And-
Misbegotten.
Yeah,
Right?
misbegotten.
Yeah. Something went wrong. That's how we get women. What a gigantic difference, right, from Chrysostom. Yeah. And what else is such a dramatic indication in the Western Church, the Roman Catholic Church, that they hesitate about the full goodness of marital relations? The mandatory celibate clergy. And it's a glaring, blatant kind of admission or proclamation, isn't it? That something isn't quite right about marital relations. Augustine himself, he says it's impossible not to have concupiscence, even if the couple is only thinking about having children. They're hung up on it, on the full goodness of marital relations. And so, yeah, overreaction, David, against these errors. And how easy is it to overreact and go too far the other direction, right? So that our society is virtually saying, well, anything goes, right? No limits, no regulations on sexual behavior at all. So tragic. When you lose the balance. Yeah.
And in the Roman Catholic Church, right? Are they allowed to go
I don't know. Anything's happening, it's the current Roman Church is such disarray. I mean, maybe because they feel guilty about having only male priests and yielding to some of the pressure, some of the criticizing. Well, at least we'll give them that much. I think it's a huge mistake.
Do we have to worry about, do we have any risk in that regard?
I think we have to watch out for it. We do. It's very confusing.
I was at a Roman Catholic First Communion. They had like 60, 70 people, and then they had 4 female altar servers. Literally 30 males that were, and they couldn't find. So, it seemed rather odd to me.
It's hard. Yeah. It's not going to be helpful. It's never going to be enough, right, to satisfy those who really are yearning for women clergy. It's confusing to the girls. The boys probably aren't going to welcome the girls in their midst. It's the boys need that time to step up and shown this service, right? Reflecting the general pattern of male headship. Boys taking care of girls, men taking care of women. Serving, right? Yeah. Did you? Anybody else?
Just read our booklet.
Yeah.
When's it coming out?
Soon, we hope. It's in the last stages, in the final stages. Yep. Yeah. Yes, please.
Being the devil's advocate.
Sure.
But you can see how a lot of the women who can't just walk to church and saw the Philistines, women not coming behind there. That may be an automatic turn off. Once you explain the theology,
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yes.
But if they didn't know that,
Yeah.
you can see how it would be, you're losing people. It could be because of that. I mean that.
Oh, yeah.
It's the truth.
So it's our responsibility to help
Yes.
them understand.
Yeah.
Sure. Oh, yeah. The depths of that feminist influence is so pervasive in our society. It's built on that grievous error, right? That women have to do the same things men do in order to prove that they're equal in their humanity.
Yeah, so would Christos be tougher on men in today's church? Like, he be tougher on men. Like, are men doing a good enough job? In light of what he said, I mean, he critiques men in his writings.
He says the women are putting us to shame.
Yeah.
Yeah. He'd say the same thing now, probably.
Yeah.
Right, and importantly, St. John Chrysostom usually critiques people who are there. Right? And then one of the challenges we do face is we have many converts to the faith in the last 5 or so years, but there's 65-70% men.
Yeah.
Right? And in our parish, it's probably higher than that.
I think it reflects the fact that we have the male priesthood.
Yeah, but
Right? It's not a feminized church. You look at the Protestant denominations who have opened up ordination to women. The seminaries, they're more than half women. And just at a very practical level, if the men aren't kind of made to do it in a way, they're not going to. The men need that extra incentive, that mandate, really. And of course, we say it's a God-given mandate. God-given. To serve the flock as Christ serves his bride, the church. Yeah. Anything else? Thanks for all your attention. Anything you want?